The judge looked at my son-in-law over the rims of her glasses the way a teacher looks at a student who's just handed in someone else's homework. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who has heard every variation of this story before, "you're telling this court that your father-in-law, a man who ran a successful landscaping business for 31 years, who owns 2 properties outright, who has managed his own finances without incident for 6 decades, suddenly became incompetent the same week he stopped transferring money into your account." My son-in-law Brendan shifted in his chair. His lawyer touched his arm. I sat at the other table and said nothing. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Paulette, had told me to say nothing unless directly asked. "Let them talk," she'd said. "They'll do enough damage on their own." She was right. I should back up. That's what my wife Elaine used to say whenever I launched into a story mid-current. "Back up, Frank. Start from the beginning so people know why it matters." She died 4 years ago, a Wednesday in November, and I still hear her voice in the mornings when I'm making coffee. I don't mind it. It's a comfort most days. Elaine and I built everything ourselves. We came to Edmonton from a small town in New Brunswick. She was 22, I was 24. We had our daughter Melissa 18 months after we got married, and for the first decade we scraped. I started the landscaping company out of my truck. 1 mower, 1 trailer, 3 residential contracts, and a business loan that kept me awake most of 1987. By the time Melissa was in high school, we had a crew of 14 and contracts with 3 commercial properties in the south end of the city. We weren't rich, but we were solid. We owned our home, we had no debt, and when Elaine was diagnosed with the cancer that eventually took her, we had enough that she didn't spend her last year worrying about money. I'm grateful for that. It's the one thing I never had to regret. Melissa was our only child. We doted on her, maybe more than we should have. I knew that even then, you see it happening, and you can't quite stop yourself, because she was so much like Elaine. Sharp sense of humor, impatient with nonsense, loyal past the point of reason. She met Brendan at a work conference in Calgary when she was 34. He was in commercial real estate. He had a big laugh, and an expensive watch, and opinions about wine that he shared, whether you'd asked for them or not. Elaine thought he was charming. I thought he was performing, but I kept that to myself because Melissa was happy, and that mattered more than my instincts. They got married in 2016 at a vineyard in the Okanagan. Beautiful wedding. I paid for most of it without being asked. Around $42,000. It seemed like a gift, the kind you give once because your daughter is getting married and you want the day to be beautiful. I didn't expect it to be a preview. The financial help started small, the way those things always do. Brendan had a rough quarter. The real estate market in Calgary softened and a deal he'd been counting on fell through. Could we bridge a gap just for a couple months, just until the next commission came in? I lent them $8,000. They paid back half of it. Then another request came and I didn't ask about the first half. And somewhere in that silence, a pattern was established. By 2021, I was sending them $4,000 a month. There was always a reason. The mortgage had jumped when they refinanced. Melissa had taken a step back from her own work to deal with some health issues. Nothing serious, she said, but tiring. The kids needed things. They had 2 sons, Owen and Max, who were 8 and 6 by then, and I adored those boys. I told myself the money was partly for them. That made it easier to keep sending it. What I didn't do, and this is the part I've had to sit with, was say, stop. I was 63 years old and in good health, and my business had been sold 2 years prior for enough that I wasn't watching the transfers hurt my account. So I let it go on. I'm not blameless in how it started. I want to say that plainly because it's true. Then I had the heart attack. It wasn't catastrophic, the cardiologist used the word moderate, but I was in the Royal Alexandra for 9 days. And for the first 3 I was not entirely sure what was happening around me. I was scared in a way I hadn't been since Elaine's diagnosis. That kind of scared recalibrates things. You stop tolerating a lot of nonsense without quite deciding to. I called Melissa from the hospital on day 4 when I was sitting up and thinking clearly. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad, hi, how are you feeling?" "Improving," I said. "I could use some company. Any chance you and Brendan could come up for a week?" I'm going to need some help when I get home. Doctor says I shouldn't be lifting anything, driving, any of that. There was a pause. Oh, Dad, the thing is, we're leaving for Costa Rica on Saturday. I thought I hadn't heard correctly. Sorry, the trip. We've had it booked since March. Non-refundable. The resort packages, the flights. Brendan looked into it and we'd lose basically everything. I'm in the hospital, Melissa. I know, and I feel terrible. But you said it wasn't life-threatening. The doctor said moderate. That doesn't mean minor. Dad. Her voice had shifted into a tone I recognized, the one that preceded a long explanation of why something she was doing was actually reasonable. You have friends there. You have your neighbor, Patricia. Can't she check in on you? I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the IV line in my arm and thinking about the vineyard wedding and the $8,000 and the $4,000 a month and 38 years of being the person who showed up. Sure, I said. Have a good trip. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Patricia, who is 71 and has bad knees and was never asked by me to do any such thing, did not, in fact, look after me. I hired a home care worker named Sylvie through a private agency. She came twice a day for 3 weeks, cost me $2,200, and was more useful and kinder than I had any right to expect from a stranger. She made sure I took my medications. She made soup. She didn't complain once. On the day Melissa and Brendan landed back in Calgary, tanned and apparently untroubled, I called my accountant and stopped the monthly transfers. All of them. I also called Paulette, who I'd used for estate matters before, and told her I wanted to make some changes to my will, just to look at things, just to think. The calls started that evening. Melissa first, then Brendan, then Melissa again. I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to have the conversation, and I knew myself well enough to know that if Melissa cried, I would fold. So I waited. Brendan called 19 times in 2 days. On the 20th call, I answered. Frank? He never called me Dad. What's going on with the account? There's been a gap. I've paused the transfers, I said. I've been doing some thinking while I was recovering. Paused. He repeated the word as if it were a foreign term. What does that mean, paused? It means they've stopped for now. I'm reviewing some things. Frank, we have a mortgage payment in 12 days. I know. You should probably look at where the money for that comes from. The silence on his end was long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, I don't think you understand what this does to us. I think I understand better than you'd expect, I said, and ended the call. What happened next I didn't anticipate. I probably should have. Brendan found a lawyer, a younger man, who, based on what I later heard in court, seemed to specialize in exactly this kind of case. Adult children challenging the competency of elderly parents who had made financial decisions that inconvenienced them. It is a growth industry, apparently. 2 weeks after I stopped the transfers, I received a formal notice that Brendan and Melissa were applying to have a guardian appointed to oversee my financial affairs on the grounds that my heart attack had impaired my cognitive capacity to make sound decisions. They had submitted a supporting letter from a doctor I had never met or spoken to. I showed the letter to Paulette. She read it twice, set it down, and looked at me with an expression that was half outrage and half professional satisfaction, the look of a lawyer who has just been handed a genuinely winnable case. They found someone to write this, she said. That's a problem for them. Can they do this? They can try. People try all the time. The question is whether a judge is going to look at a 66-year-old man with a clean bill of health and a 4-decade paper trail of sound financial management and decide he needs a guardian because he stopped giving his daughter an allowance. She paused. The answer is no. The hearing was 4 months later. I drove myself. I wore the grey suit Elaine had picked out for me years ago for a Chamber of Commerce dinner. I felt calm in the way you feel calm when you've stopped being afraid of something you were afraid of for a long time. Melissa came in with Brendan. She didn't look at me. She was wearing a blazer I didn't recognize, and her hair was different, shorter than I remembered. I notice these things because I have a habit of noticing things about people I love, even when those people are in the middle of trying to have me declared incompetent. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Justice Okafor. She had a stillness about her that I appreciated. She read through the documents without rushing. She asked Brendan's lawyer some questions that I could tell, from the lawyer's careful non-answers, were not going well for their side. Then she looked at Brendan directly. "Mr. Whitfield, the cessation of voluntary financial transfers to an adult child, that's the triggering event here, is that correct? It's part of a broader pattern of, yes or no, please." Brendan looked at his lawyer. "Yes, and the medical opinion supporting this application, this was provided by a physician who has never examined Mr. Parrish. He reviewed the hospital records from, never examined him. That's a yes." Justice Okafor made a note. Then she looked at Paulette, and Paulette stood up and said quietly, "Your Honor, my client would like to address the court directly, if that's permitted." It was. I stood up. I had written some notes, but I didn't look at them. "I gave my daughter and son-in-law approximately $260,000 over 8 years, I said. "Monthly transfers, a down payment contribution, help with the boys' school fees, other things. I did this because I could, and because I love my daughter. And I wanted things to be easier for her family than they were for mine when I was starting out. I don't regret the intention. I regret not being clearer about what it was. Help, not a salary. And I regret not noticing sooner that it had become something they planned around rather than something they were grateful for." I took a breath. Melissa was looking at the table. "I had a heart attack in January. I asked my daughter to come and help me when I came home from the hospital. She told me she couldn't cancel a Costa Rica vacation. I came home to a house I could barely move around in and hired a stranger to take care of me. That stranger was kinder to me in 3 weeks than my son-in-law has been in 8 years. I looked at Justice Okafor. I stopped the transfers because I finally understood that the money was not making anyone love me better. It was just making them less likely to notice whether I was alive." The courtroom was quiet. Melissa had her hand over her mouth. Justice Okafor let the silence sit for a moment. Then she looked at Brendan's lawyer. "The application is denied. Mr. Parrish has demonstrated more than adequate capacity." She paused. "The medical opinion submitted in support of this application is of concern to this court. I'm referring the matter to the College of Physicians and Surgeons for review. Costs are awarded to the respondent. $12,000, payable in 90 days. Brendan's face went the specific color of someone who has just fully understood the consequences of something they set in motion. Paulette walked me to my car. She was smiling. "That last part," she said, "about the stranger being kinder. Did you plan that?" "No," I said. But it was true. The true things are usually the ones that land. I drove home on the white mud with the windows down a little, even though it was only April and still cold. I needed the air. When I got back to the house, there were 11 missed calls on my landline. 6 from Brendan, 4 from a number I didn't recognize, and 1 from Melissa. I listened to Melissa's voicemail last. Her voice was not the composed voice from the courtroom. It was the voice I knew from when she was 17 and had done something she knew was wrong and couldn't quite figure out how to say so. "Dad, I don't know what I'm asking you exactly. Can we talk? Just us. Not Brendan, not lawyers, just you and me." She stopped. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. Can we talk?" I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I didn't call back that night. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just didn't trust myself yet to have the conversation that needed to happen. And I didn't want to have a smaller, easier conversation instead. Elaine had always said that I had a tendency to let people off the hook too early because I couldn't stand watching them uncomfortable. She was right. It was a flaw, and I knew it. The weeks after the hearing were strange. Brendan didn't call again. Through Paulette, I learned that they were struggling to find the $12,000 for the Costa award. Their mortgage was behind. Brendan had lost 2 commercial listings in the spring market. She didn't say whether it was related to distraction or reputation or just bad luck. But the timing wasn't a coincidence. Owen, my older grandson, called me on a Sunday afternoon. He was 9. He asked if I was coming to his hockey tournament at the end of the month. I told him I was planning on it. He said his dad had been in a bad mood a lot, but that his mom had been making pancakes on Saturdays again, which he considered a positive sign. Children are honest about everything that matters. I called Melissa on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the hearing. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. I shouldn't have gone to Costa Rica, she said, before I could say anything. I've thought about it every day since. You were in the hospital, and I told you that a vacation was more important than coming to be with you. I don't have an explanation for that. There's no version of it that makes me look like someone I want to be. I waited. And the application? That was Brendan's idea, but I signed it. I let him convince me that it was the right thing to do, that you weren't thinking clearly, that we were protecting you. I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was about the money, and I signed it anyway. Her voice broke slightly. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, where Elaine's garden had gone to seed the year she got sick, and I had never quite gotten around to restoring. The raised beds were still there, the frames I'd built her out of cedar the summer we moved in. They were good frames, they'd outlasted a lot. Why did you let it get to that point? I asked. The money. You have a job. Brendan has a job. How did $4,000 a month become load-bearing? She was quiet for a moment. Because we let it. Because it was easier to have it, and we structured everything around it, and eventually we stopped having a plan that didn't include it. And then when it stopped, we didn't have a plan at all. She paused. I think I told myself that it was yours to give, and you were giving it freely, and that made it okay. I didn't look at what it was doing to how Brendan saw you, to how I saw you. If I'm being honest, you were the person who fixed things. I stopped thinking of you as a person things could happen to. That was the truest thing she'd said. It was also the hardest one to hear. I'm not restoring the transfers, I said. I know. And the will as it currently stands is not what it was 2 years ago. I've made changes. You'll be taken care of when I'm gone, but not in the way that was previously arranged. The boys have funds set aside in trust that neither you nor Brendan can access. That's staying. I understand. I'm also not doing any of this to hurt you. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because it's the appropriate arrangement for where we actually are. No, Dad. A pause. Is there anything that could happen over time that might change things between us? Not the money. Us. I thought about that. Elaine would have said yes immediately. She was the kind of person who believed in the unlimited reformability of people she loved. I'm less certain about this. But I am also 66 years old, and I buried my wife, and I know better than most how quickly you can run out of time to attempt something. I think so, I said. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take things being different, not just things being said. And it can't involve Brendan. A long silence. He and I we're not in a good place. I don't know what's going to happen there. That's between you and him. I only know I'm not interested in rebuilding anything with you if he's managing the relationship. Okay, she said. Okay. We didn't resolve anything that night. I didn't expect to, but I went to Owen's hockey tournament at the end of the month. He played wing for the Sherwood Park Falcons, and he was scrappy and fearless in the way small boys sometimes are on ice. And I stood at the boards with my coffee and watched him and felt something uncurl in my chest that had been tight for a long time. Melissa was there. We stood beside each other for 2 periods without saying much. She bought me a second coffee. I accepted it. Owen scored a goal in the 3rd period off a scramble in front of the net. Not pretty, but it counted. And he looked up into the stands and found my face first, before anyone else, and pointed his stick at me. I pointed back. Brendan wasn't there. I didn't ask why. Things moved slowly after that, the way real things do. Brendan and Melissa separated in July. She moved with the boys into a rental in Sherwood Park, the kind of practical, affordable rental that tells you someone is finally thinking clearly about money. She went back to work full time. She called me on Sunday evenings, short calls, nothing heavy. She asked about the garden, and I told her I'd been thinking about rebuilding the raised beds. She said Owen had asked if he could help. I said I'd like that. I did rebuild them in August when the weather was still good. Owen came for a weekend and handed me boards and held things level when I needed a second pair of hands, and asked questions about tools that I answered in more detail than any 9-year-old probably wanted. Max sat in the grass and narrated everything into a stick like it was a sportscaster microphone. I haven't laughed like that in years. I planted garlic that fall. It goes in before the frost and comes up in June, patient and reliable. One of the few things in a garden that asks almost nothing of you and delivers reliably. Elaine had loved garlic. She used to say it was the most honest vegetable. I thought about the past year a lot in those quiet October evenings, sitting on the back step with my tea. The hearing, the transfers, the 9 days in the hospital. The feeling of being declared by the two people I'd spent 8 years supporting to be no longer competent to make my own choices. There are people who would have stayed angry about that. I understand why. But I found that staying angry requires a kind of ongoing attention I don't have much appetite for at this age. What I wanted was simpler. To live well, to spend time with Owen and Max, to rebuild Elaine's garden, to wake up in the morning with the sense that my life belonged to me. I had all of those things. Melissa came for dinner in November. Just her. No kids that night. I made the lamb stew Elaine used to make. I'd finally tracked down the recipe in a notebook in the back of the pantry, her handwriting on an index card tucked between 2 cookbooks. I'd cried a little, finding it. I didn't tell Melissa that. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about the boys, and about her work, and about small things, the neighbors, the early snow, a book she was reading. Near the end, she looked up from her bowl and said, "I don't expect things to go back to how they were." "They can't," I said, "but that's not necessarily a bad thing. What they were wasn't always good for either of us." She looked at the table. "I'm trying to figure out who I am without all of it. The lifestyle, the money, Brendan's plans. I don't know what I actually want, except I know that what I had wasn't it." "That's a reasonable place to start," I said. She helped me wash the dishes. She dried. We didn't talk much while we did it. Just the ordinary quiet of 2 people in a kitchen at the end of an evening. She put on her coat and hugged me at the door, and I held on a little longer than usual. "Sunday," I said. "Sunday," she said. I stood in the doorway and watched her car pull out and disappear down the street. The air smelled like early winter and wood smoke from somewhere nearby. I was not the same man I'd been before the hospital. I knew that. The heart attack had done something to my sense of what was worth protecting. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind of transformation that makes for a good story at a dinner party. Just a quiet recalibration. I'd stopped being willing to pay for proximity. The garlic was in the ground. The raised beds were solid. The lamb stew recipe was taped inside the pantry door where I could find it again without searching. I was not done. That was the thing I kept coming back to. At 66, with a heart that had needed some attention and a family that was finding its shape again, slowly, imperfectly, I was not close to done. I went inside and locked the door and made another cup of tea. And it was enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to, sitting in that hospital bed on day 4, phone in hand, listening to my daughter tell me that a resort booking mattered more than her father coming home to an empty house. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "Sure, have a good trip," and hung up. And I think that was the moment everything actually changed. Not the court hearing, not the stopped transfers, not any of the dramatic things that came later. Just that quiet phone call and the decision I made in the silence after it. I've thought a lot about what allowed things to get that far. I wasn't a passive man. I ran a business for 3 decades. I made hard calls. But inside my own family, I had a habit of smoothing things over before they needed to be said clearly, of mistaking generosity for connection and then wondering why the connection felt thin. I kept giving because I told myself it was love. It was partly love. But it was also easier than having an honest conversation about what we actually were to each other. I let that go on for 8 years because the discomfort of stopping felt larger than the cost of continuing. That was my failure of judgment, and I own it. What I learned, slowly, the way you learn things that matter, is that real clarity requires a kind of honesty that's uncomfortable to sit with. When Brendan filed that court application, he was counting on me to be what I'd always been, someone who'd absorb the cost of someone else's choices rather than cause a scene. And for a long time, he would have been right. It took a heart attack and 9 days in a hospital and a home care worker named Sylvie, a stranger who showed up and did her job with more dignity than my own family managed, to show me what I'd been accepting as normal. Watching Melissa work through her own reckoning over the months that followed, I understood something about how character actually develops in people. It doesn't happen in the good stretches. It happens when the comfortable structure falls away, and you find out whether there's anything underneath it. Melissa had to lose the lifestyle, lose the marriage, lose the version of herself that had been built around someone else's ambitions, before she could figure out what she actually valued. That's painful to watch in someone you love, but I don't think there was a shortcut through it. What I know now is that integrity, the real kind, not the performed kind, is built through choices that cost you something. Brendan's choices cost him everything. Melissa's choices cost her a great deal, and she's rebuilding from that with an honesty I genuinely respect. My own choices, the ones I made too late and then finally made right, cost me some comfort and some years I can't get back. But they gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd been losing, the sense that my life was mine. I planted garlic in those raised beds in October. It'll come up in June, same as always. Patient, reliable, not asking for anything except decent soil and a little time. Elaine loved it for exactly that reason. I think I understand it better now than I did when she was here to explain it to me. Some things only grow after a hard winter. That turns out to be true about more than gardens.